Part 103. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 1021. Chapter 1021. I want you to kneel down and salute. Yan Hanbei was really angry to death. With such a minister here, how could Ziliang talk about the future? Fan Qinjiao smiled and said nothing. As the saying goes, if the upper beam is not straight, the lower beam will be crooked, and if the middle beam is not straight, it will fall down. Even the people in the dragon position are only interested in making profits for themselves. How can the officials below be okay? In the final analysis, the problem still lies at the root. What should we do now? Are we really going to watch all the winds blow towards the third prince? Yan Hanbei asked unwillingly. If you want to show filial piety, you don't necessarily have to go to the emperor's side. Frequently visiting the concubines is also a form of filial piety. No one knows that we juniors are really going to visit us. Mother-in-law, it's better to use mother-in-law's words to care about the emperor's dragon body. Yan Hanbei. Why didn't she think that she could do this? For a moment, I felt that King Pinglai was being dragged in front of concubine Lu Ren by his ears all day long, which was actually quite good. Wang Pinglai, who was currently being scolded by concubine Lu Ren and had a headache, would probably vomit blood on the spot if he knew that his concubine had such thoughts. Don't worry, I'll send someone to tell the 8th and 6th princes when I get back. Yan Hanbei stood up and said, they are all the royal daughters-in-law. Who doesn't have an elder in the palace? I can't stand her. Yan Hanbei has always been a person who does what he says. Not long after, the 8th prince concubine and Han Jingchen received the news. Fortunately, the 8th prince's concubine had a relatively harmonious relationship with concubine Jiangshu. She got up and went to concubine Jiangshu's palace. But Han Jingchen. The 6th prince looked at his wife's resentful look, trembled all over, and swallowed subconsciously, why don't you go see the queen? My mother-in-law left early, but she was in the palace a few years ago. The queen still took good care of me. Of course Han Jingchen did not reject the queen, she simply cleaned up, dragged the 6th prince and went out. There is only such a big place in the palace, so news can be spread quickly. Not long after, the news that several princes and concubines visited the harem concubines spread. Although it did not cause much turmoil, it invisibly spread the news to the third prince. The public opinion about visiting the emperor was suppressed a lot. A person who is filial will naturally attract attention. But it is reasonable for everyone to be filial. The third prince can visit the emperor, and several princes and concubines can visit the harem and concubines. In this way, even those who want to create public opinion for the third prince behind his back have to keep their mouths shut. Otherwise everyone is filial, but only the third prince's filial piety is the only one where rumors are flying. Although these princes and concubines are obviously the prince's concubines, and there is no hatred to be provoked, but by spreading rumors so blatantly to cause trouble, doesn't it mean that someone is deliberately trying to show off the filial piety of the third prince? The third prince's party, who have worked hard to secretly continue to promote the third prince's good reputation, are really spitting out their old blood. They spent so much effort to publicize the third prince's reputation for filial piety, but now it was a good thing, several princes and concubines were killed to pieces in minutes. Fan Qinjiao waited for Yan Hanbei and the 6th prince to leave the queen's palace before he got up to visit the queen. After all, the current situation was serious. If everyone gathered at the queen's place all at once, he would have something to say to the queen. Come to trouble. Unexpectedly, not long after walking out of the yard, I met an acquaintance. Fan Zixio and Fan Swinning, who were also walking this way, did not expect to meet Fan Qinjiao by chance. However, they only paused for a moment and continued walking over. Seeing Fan Qinjiao, Fan Zixio said angrily, you have no education at all. How can you not know how to salute and say hello when you see an elder? He is indeed a wild thing outside. Fan Kinjao smiled after hearing this. You shouldn't ask me whether I am well educated. You should ask the Fan family or yourself. Or, let me help you recall what happened back then. Why did I live outside with my mother and become what you call a wild thing? Fan Zixio's face darkened when he was asked. Fan Swinning took a step forward and said, holding Fan Kinjao's hand, Grandpa is old, so why should my sister have to be angry with him? No matter what, my grandfather is a person related to us by blood. In front of Bailey Rongs, Fan Swinning did not fight or even say anything. This was to arouse Bailey Rongs' affection for her, but in such an occasion, her bitch-like attitude came naturally. All spread. After all, Zy Ling used the same method to please Fan Yurong, win over Fan Zixiu, and successfully ejected Hua Yuelian and Fan Kinjao. Fan Swinning has watched Zy Ling deal with her grandfather and father in the house since she was a child, so she naturally understands that this method is the best way to sow discord and show her sensibility and filial piety. Fan Kinjao now no longer hates Fan Swinning, but feels disgusted. Looking at her pretentious look makes her feel nauseous. However, Fan Kinjao also saw clearly why she lost to Fan Swinning in her previous life. After all, she is nothing compared to this person's pretentiousness. Originally, I wanted to rekindle the old relationship with my sister and Mr. Fan, but seeing that Mr. Fan always followed the rules and etiquette, I couldn't resist disobeying him. Although I am not talented, I am the crown prince appointed by the emperor. In the past, I would have to give in when Mr. Fan bent over, but now I think I can bear it. Fan Kinjao shook Fan Swinning's hand away. With the current situation, there is no need for her to look like Fan Swinning. Her identity alone can kill Fan Swinning. As for my sister's status, although I don't have enough money to greet me, but for the sake of you and me, I still have to give you this little face, otherwise my grandfather is afraid that I will be called cold and heartless again. Fan Kinjao looked at the two people in front of him coldly, with no concealment of disgust in his eyes. They were people on two different roads, so why bother to be secretive? It would be better to slap them directly like this. On the face. Clean and crisp. Fan Swinning's face turned pale. She didn't expect that Fan Kinjao would dare to do such a thing in front of her grandfather. She said tremblingly, Sister, why do you have to do this? After all, we are all a family. Fan Kinjao looked at her and said, the Fan family's gate has never allowed me to pass through. So this grandfather is yours and has nothing to do with me. These words, neither light nor serious, were like a punch to the heart of the two of them. Not very harmful, but extremely insulting. Fan Zixio looked at Fan Kinjao with an angry look on his face, and just as he was about to speak, he heard Fan Kinjao speak again. I remember that Lord Fan was very dignified in the past, and he said everything in the house, but now he just speaks a few words. Such a ferocious look. Oh, I remembered, this is a palace, not a Fan family. You evildoer. Fan Zixiakai's heart was beating fast. This Fan Kinjao was simply too hateful. If my sister insists on doing this, I will kowtow to my sister on behalf of my grandfather. If my sister is still not satisfied, I will kneel down in front of my sister's door in person later and I will kowtow to my sister until she is satisfied. Fan Swinning helped her. Living in a college to study by himself, no matter how you look at it, he looks pitiful and has been forced into a dead end. Of course she didn't want to kneel down and kowtow to Fan Kinjao, but if it could arouse the pity of Fan Zixio and Bailey Rongs, or even make Fan Kinjao criticized, it would be worthwhile. Fan Swinning knows very well that she is different from Fan Kinjao now. She cannot be as arrogant as Fan Kinjao and can only make profits for herself in her own way. Please don't be angry, sister. I will kowtow to my sister instead of my grandfather, Fan Swinning said, and was about to kneel on the ground. What's so noisy? A voice suddenly sounded behind several people. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 1022. Chapter 1022, You have to say thank you when you are punished. Fan Zixio and Fan Swinning turned around at the same time and saw a group of people walking out of the Queen's palace. Take a closer look again. Isn't it the Queen who is walking in the front? At this time, both Fan Zixio and Fan Swinning could no longer stand, and they both bent down and knelt on the ground. I am a humble minister and a concubine. I have seen the Queen. The Queen is 1,000 years old. Fan Kinjao also knelt on the ground. My daughter-in-law bows to her mother. Before her knees could bend completely, Queen Zhen 11 grabbed her and said with a smile, I have said that there is no need for these complicated etiquettes on weekdays, so get up. Fan Kinjao nodded slightly and stood beside the Queen. Then he looked at Fan Zixio and Fan Swinning, still kneeling on the ground. Although it was still warm in the autumn, the ground was obviously cool. The two of them knelt on the ground for only a moment, and their knees were numb from the cold. Queen Zhen 11 had no intention of paying attention to these two people. She just looked at Fan Kinjao and said, the sixth prince and his wife just left, and the two of them made a lot of noise. I am used to being clean, so I am still a little uncomfortable with it. I thought that after the couple left, they would finally be a little quieter, but I didn't expect you to come. Fan Kinjao couldn't hear the implication of these words, and quickly lowered his head and said, it's my daughter-in-law who deserves to die. She never relieves her mother's worries on weekdays, and yet she yells in front of her mother's palace without knowing the right amount. My daughter-in-law wants to. I will be sentenced to 15 years of imprisonment. I just hope that my mother can feel at ease. Lily. She risked her life when she first came up, and the crown princess was too cruel. The empress pointed out Sang and scolded Huai, and she obviously meant to favor the crown princess. Unexpectedly, the crown princess actually followed Shanggang online. Lily knows that the crown princess has always been smart, but now she seems a little too smart. Hearing this, Fan Zixio and Fan Swinning felt their hearts tremble, especially Fan Zixio, who was unable to kneel any longer and was about to fall headfirst to the ground. Judging from the Queen's actions, anyone who is not blind can see how much the Queen loves Fan Kinjao, otherwise the three of them would not be standing here. Only Fan Kinjao got up, and they were still kneeling on the ground. Still sitting. If even Fan Kinjao, who was favored by the Empress, took the initiative to ask for help, what would they do? 30 boards? Or 40? The more Fan Zixio and Fan Swinning thought about it, the more unsure they became, and their bodies began to tremble. Queen Zhen 11 sneered, speaking of which, Lord Fan is also someone who has stood in the court for a long time. Why is it so difficult to kneel for a moment now? And Aunt Fan in the third prince's house is already married. The third prince has been around for a long time, how come he is still so lax in his rules? Lily immediately took over the words, I just heard that Aunt Fan volunteered to kneel in front of the crown princess's door. She has a good intention, but her physical strength is not satisfactory. Empress Zhen 11 paused and said, how long have you been kneeling now? She looks like she is dying. If she knelt down outside the door of the crown princess and passed out, people who don't know would think that the crown princess was being harsh. Where is my aunt? Facing the empress, Fan Swinning thought of the scene when she was still Yuning, and was ridiculed by the empress in the cold palace. Now that the past collided with reality, cold sweat broke out on Fan Swinning's forehead. Queen, please calm down, concubine. I just hope that my sister can resolve the gap between her and my grandfather. At this point, are you still showing off your prowess? Empress Zhen 11 didn't even raise her eyes and said expressionlessly, I think Aunt Fan also heard what the crown princess said just now. Since the crown princess took the initiative to ask for 15 punishments, you and Lord Fan will naturally be punished together. If you follow Aunt Fan's words, will you also accept Master Fan's punishment? Fan Swinning. Queen, forgive me, forgive me. Fan Swinning suddenly kowtowed to the ground, not mentioning anything about helping Fan Zixio to be tortured. Empress Gen 11 smiled coldly, then looked at Fan Zixio and said, "In this case, Master Fan may have to bear the consequences of this." The layer of hypocrisy on Fan Swinning's face was torn off and thrown to the ground, and also thrown in front of Fan Zixio. Such an obvious move, Fan Zixio could see it even if he was blind. Fan Swinning knew that if she wanted to continue to be more filial than Fan Kinjao in front of her grandfather, she should step forward at this time. But it's hard to guess what the queen is thinking. Who knows whether the queen wants to scare her or really wants to make a move? If the queen is really punished, how will she bear it? Even if each person had 15 boards, she would still have 30 points. 30 big boards. She was afraid that her entire lower back would be a mess. Fan Zixio glanced at Fan Swinning beside him. The temperature in his eyes cooled down a bit. He lowered his head and said, "I accidentally disturbed the queen. I am willing to accept it no matter how the queen punishes me. I only hope that the queen can calm down." These words seem to be asking for forgiveness, but in fact they imply that the queen has a bad temper. If the queen is really punished, I am afraid that soon there will be rumors in the palace that the queen cannot tolerate the ministers of the court. Queen Gen 11 naturally would not fall for this trick. She looked at Fan Kinjao beside her and asked, "What do you think, the crown princess?" Fan Kinjao couldn't see Fan Zixio's intention, so he thought for a moment and said, "My daughter-in-law thinks that since Master Fan already knows his fault, it's better to give him a lighter punishment. How can my daughter-in-law bear to be punished really severely when she knows that her mother is considerate?" With these words, the queen was cleared up in an instant. Queen Gen 11 nodded and said, "Since the crown princess intercedes for you too, I will not really beat you to pieces in the palace. However, serious crimes can be exempted, but misdemeanors will still be punished." As Queen Gen 11 spoke, she frowned and looked embarrassed. Fan Kinjao caught the words and said, "From my daughter-in-law's point of view, why not punish Master Fan and Aunt Fan to kneel here for an hour? This will also serve as a warning to others not to make loud noises in front of the Queen's house in the future." Empress Gen 11 seemed to agree with this proposal. She looked at the two people kneeling on the ground and said, "The crown princess is interceding for you, so let's do this." Lily said quickly, "Master Fan, Aunt Fan, why don't you thank the crown princess quickly?" Fan Zixio. Fan Swinning. What's this? It is heartbreaking to kill people. The whole thing seemed to be caused by Fan Kinjao begging for mercy, but just now it was Fan Kinjao who said he was the one holding the board. Now he made them kneel here for an hour, which broke their legs, and then gave them. What's the difference between asking them to be grateful if they have a crutch? Fan Swinning's face turned pale, but she could only say, "I thank the crown princess." Even though Fan Zixio was so angry that he wanted to pass out several times, he still gritted his teeth and said, "Wei Chen, thank the crown princess." Empress Gen 11 smiled and nodded. Instead of ordering the palace people to stay here, she led everyone back to the palace, holding Fan Kinjao's hand. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 1023. Chapter 1023. The Queen is supporting the show. The autumn wind was cold and cool. Fan Zixio and Fan Swinning were kneeling in front of the Queen's palace, like two doorsteps. The palace people passing by were naturally surprised when they saw this, but they were surprised. Looking at the situation, they knew without asking that it was Fan Zixio and Fan Swinning who had angered the Queen, otherwise they would have to kneel in front of the Queen's door. Woolen cloth? The palace people have always known that the Queen has a good temper, so at this time, no one would suspect that the Queen punished the two of them. In addition, there were no palace people around to watch over them. Naturally, everyone believed that it must be Fan Zixio, and Fan Swinning collided with the queen, and then they knelt down and admitted their mistake. One is a grandfather and the other is a granddaughter. It is unusual for two people to collide with the queen together. Is this the so-called upper beam is not straight and the lower beam is crooked? Fan Zixio. Fan Swinning. Even though he was punished to kneel down, he was also stigmatized. Not to mention how frustrating it is. Looking at Fan Kinjao, who had already entered the palace with the queen, what else did Fan Zixio not understand? The queen is clearly supporting Fan Kinjao. Fan Zixio knew very well that as the queen's daughter-in-law, it was reasonable for Fan Kinjao to be favored by the queen, but was this too much favoritism? He has been in the court for so many years, and even if the empress really wanted to support someone, she would just send someone to come forward to make peace. But now that the empress has taken the initiative to start a quarrel, she has to give Fan Kinjao more face. Grandpa is angry with me? But it's not that I don't want to help my grandfather, it's just that the queen is in such a difficult position. I'm afraid that if I help my grandfather, my sister will continue to incite the queen to punish my grandfather severely. Fan Swinning choked up and said. When Fan Zixio came to his senses, he saw Fan Swinning looking like he was about to cry. Fan Kinjao is just trying to have a moment of pleasure, how long can he be prestige? Fan Zixio was a little bit blaming Fan Swinning just now, but now that he heard what Fan Swinning said, he still felt that what she said made some sense. After all, it was all the fault of that Fan Kinjao. It's just for an hour with me accompanying my grandfather, I can also protect him from the wind, Fan Swinning said, and took the initiative to move closer to Fan Zixio. Fan Zixio's eyes softened, and when he raised his head to look at the palace in front of him, his teeth were so filled with hatred that he was about to bite them to pieces. Do you really think that if the emperor doesn't see the third prince will have nothing to do? Just wait and see, soon the third prince we will regain the emperor's trust, and when that happens, let's see if Fan Kinjao can still be so arrogant. When Fan Swinning heard this, a flash of disappointment quickly flashed in her eyes, but soon she nodded along with her, as if she was looking forward to the third prince's success. Inside the palace, Fan Kinjao was chatting with the queen about household matters, nothing more than Brother Ren and King Zin's trivial matters. Queen Zhen 11 was beaming when she heard this. It was only when Lily sent out all the palace attendants that things started to happen. Gets horny. It was your idea to let the princes and concubines visit the concubines in the harem today, Queen Zhen 11 asked. Fan Kinjao didn't hide anything and said, the queen is wise. Empress Zhen 11 nodded and said, you did a good job. This not only suppressed the momentum created by the third prince, but also made it difficult for people to talk about it. As for the sixth prince, are you sure he can handle it? Empress Zhen 11 will never forget that the sixth prince sat in front of her shaking like chaff. Obviously scared to death. Although the sixth prince is a little timid, he is still a responsible person at heart. It was most appropriate for him to be the only one to speak in the hall that day. After all, my father also knew that the sixth prince was cowardly and afraid of getting into trouble. Although my father might still be worried afterward. There will be doubts, but the sixth prince is the one who can convince his father that this matter is true. Queen Zhengzi. Being able to use the sixth prince's shortcomings as strengths is really embarrassing his own daughter-in-law. By the way, that kid Fengming has been staying in his palace during this period. You also know that the emperor is suspicious when he is, and he is indeed too busy to be with you. Empress Zhen 11 felt that it was still necessary to explain. Don't let this little thing affect the relationship between two people. Fan Kinjao said, my daughter-in-law understands, and my mother can rest assured. Empress Zhen 11 smiled happily, took Fan Kinjao's hand and said, I have secretly sent someone out of the palace for the palace servant who faked his death, and told the public that he had been thrown out and buried. Fengming also asked me to let me tell you that the excitement of breaking into Taoist temples to steal elixirs is over, so you can rest assured. Fourth uncle has left? Although Fan Qinjiao knew that Bailey Fengming would never let his fourth uncle stay in the palace for too long and cause trouble and burn himself, he still felt reluctant to let go after hearing it with his own ears. After all, I don't know when we will meet again next time. Queen Zhen 11 looked at Fan Qinjiao with a somewhat ugly face, as if he was reminiscing about something, and did not interrupt her. She waited until Fan Qinjiao gradually came back to her senses before saying again, "Your method is still effective. At least the emperor is now." There was no doubt that the palace man's death was a fraud. It was a waste of concubine Yu's efforts to send her daughter to apprentice, but in the end, she couldn't even tell whether the palace man was dead or alive. Empress Zhen 11 thought that if concubine Yu knew that the palace servant was just faking his death, she would be so angry that she would faint. Actually, my daughter-in-law was not sure that she could prevent Princess Yunyu from discovering An Iduan. So that day, she deliberately seduced Princess Yunyu into thinking that she wanted to find evidence on the palace man that the third prince had killed him. Princess Yunyu is confused if she cares. She is only busy proving the innocence of the third prince and doesn't care about anything else, Fan Qinjiao said. I have to say that Yunyu is still very hidden. From the time Yunyu came back to now, Fan Qinjiao still can't grasp how much Yunyu's medical skills are. This is Yunyu's deliberate hiding, and it's also Yunyu's power. Wealth is gained through danger. There is no such thing as a pie in the sky for no reason. However, that child Yunyu is indeed a thoughtful person. She was very pretentious when she was a child, Empress Zhen 11 sneered, remembering the moment when she just gave birth to Fengming. Son, Yunyu ran to her from a distance away. It's hard to blame Fengming for his gentle but indifferent and distant temperament since he was a child. Otherwise, he would have been dragged by Yunyu and played like a monkey. Daughter-in-law, I heard that recently there have been rumors in the palace that the third prince goes to visit his father every day, but he has never been able to see him, Fan Qinjiao asked. Empress Zhen 11 snorted and said, the third prince has grown up with the emperor's pain. Even if the emperor has doubts in his heart, he won't be able to hold on for too long. He is afraid that the third prince will soon be let in. Empress Zhen 11 had seen with her own eyes how the emperor favored the third prince, and now the empress needed the third prince, so how could she abandon him so easily? Fan Qinjiao nodded and said, what the queen mother said is that we can just relax and wait. Now she is not afraid that the third prince will enter the emperor's door, but she is afraid that the third prince will not be able to enter. Only when the third prince convinces the emperor can they proceed. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 1024. Chapter 1024. Father, please listen to my son's explanation. There was a depressing silence in the emperor's palace. Baitu came in from the door, walked to the emperor's side and said, Your Majesty, the third prince and Princess Yunyu are here to ask for an audience. Emperor Yongchang waved his hand, let them go back. Baitu nodded, turned around and walked out the door. Soon, Bailey Rong's choked voice sounded outside the door, Manager Bai, I just want to see my father. As soon as I see that my father is well, I will leave immediately. Please be accommodating, Manager Bai accommodating. Yunyu also quickly took out a purse and stuffed it into Baitu's hand, Mr. Bai, please let us see our father. The three princes have been having trouble sleeping and eating these past few days. They are all thinking about the emperor. This is a short time. I have lost a lot of weight in just a few days. If I continue like this, I'm afraid. Baitu didn't dare to take the hot money, so she quickly pushed back and said, Princess Yunyu, please don't embarrass me. I'm just an errand boy. The important thing is up to the emperor. Yunyu's expression changed. Even though she knew that her father didn't want to see them, she still felt terribly uncomfortable when she heard Baitu say it with her own ears. From the time she could remember, her father loved her very much. Later, after the third prince was born, his father even ran to his mother and concubine's palace from time to time. Who didn't know that the two of them were the most loved by his father at that time? But now, the father directly shuts them out. If this matter really spreads out, how can she and the third prince still have face to talk about? Bailey Wrong seemed to have lost his footing and fell towards the ground. Baitu was frightened and rushed over to help him, but he couldn't compare with Bailey Wrong's strength. He was pulled. They fell to the ground together. "How are you, Third Highness? Did you fall?" Baitu carefully inspected Bailey Wrong's body. Bailey Wrongs waved his hand feebly. "No need to worry, Mr. Bai, I'm fine." "You're like this, how can you say you're fine? If you continue like this, your life will really be in danger," Yunyu said, then turned to look at the palace servants in the courtyard and said, "Why don't you hurry up and call the imperial doctor over?" Bailey Wrongs grabbed Yunyu's hand and said, "No need, I'm fine. Just let me take a look." Yunyu was angry and helpless. "I can show you that it's okay, but you still need the imperial doctor to open a house to dispense the medicine. You should listen to the emperor's advice and go back with me first." Bailey Wrongs shook his head, but still looked at the closed door of the palace in front of him without giving up, his eyes full of nostalgia and sadness. "I haven't seen my father yet, so I don't want to leave." Yunyu also started to choke when she saw this. "Why are you so stubborn? Do you really want to let the white-haired concubine give away the black-haired one?" Baitu looked at the two siblings who were either dead or silent. They were scared to death. If something really happened here, he would cut himself into hundreds of pieces and it wouldn't be enough to compensate. Yes, he quickly called all the palace people around him and looked after the third prince carefully. The noise outside was transmitted into the palace without missing a word. Emperor Yongchang sat silently on the collapse, looking at the palaces not far away with a complicated expression in his eyes. It happened that at this time, Bailey Wrong's voice came in weakly. "Father, I am just worried about your dragon body. No matter what happens, I will definitely stand by my father's side. If the father is unhappy, don't bear it. Even if it is punished on his son, it is better than the father himself." Emperor Yongchang closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, he said, "White tea." Baitu, who was still thinking about how to clean up the mess outside, quickly opened the door and entered. "Your Majesty, my servant is here." Emperor Yongchang looked at the pale third prince in the courtyard along the crack of the open door, and then said again, "Let them come in." Yes. Baitu bent down to accept the order, turned around and invited the third prince and Princess Yunyu to come in. Bailey Wrongs and Yunyu secretly looked at each other, and then they calmly suppressed the thoughts in their eyes. Yunyu supported Bailey Wrongs, who seemed to have no strength to walk, and both stepped into the palace. When Bailey Wrongs saw the emperor sitting on the couch, he said, "Pft." He knelt down on the ground with a cry, "Father, I am really wronged. Father, please believe me." Bailey Wrongs was crying with a very aggrieved look on his face, but in fact, he had already begun to quickly think about the emperor's various reactions and questions in his heart, and how he should respond. Seeing this, Baitu quickly turned around and retreated, dismissing all the palace people at the door. After waiting until there was no movement outside the door, Yunyu knelt on the ground and said, "Father, although what happened that day happened suddenly, it cannot withstand scrutiny at all. Please give me some advice, give me a chance to explain." "Say," Emperor Yongchang said expressionlessly. Yunyu continued, "Because he was on duty in front of the emperor, the palace man eavesdropped on the conversation between my son and his father, and thus came up with the idea of a Taoist temple. These seemed reasonable, but if I thought about it carefully, if the palace man really had the idea of elixirs early on, why didn't he take action when he was in the palace before?" Emperor Yongchang raised his eyelids and looked at Yunyu. "What do you mean?" "What I mean is that everything is too deliberate. Maybe someone has a grudge against the third prince and just wants to find a reason to separate the father from the third prince and his son," Yunyu said firmly. "You mean, after such a big incident, even the Taoist temple was stolen, that's all." Emperor Yongchang's voice lacked any warmth. Yunyu paused for a moment, then lowered her head in fear. "Father, please calm down, I didn't mean that. I just feel that this matter is just for the third prince." Emperor Yongchang was silent and did not continue to speak. "Father, it's all my fault. It was my son who was too arrogant during this period, which is why I caused such a disaster, and almost implicated my father in it. I am guilty, and I hope my father will be punished severely." Bailey Rongs knelt on the ground with snot and tears. He really looked like a self-blaming and helpless son. With no other choice, he could only kneel in front of his father and beg. "Who in the palace or outside the palace doesn't know that I loved you when I beat you when you were a child? There is nothing to be jealous about," Emperor Yongchang said calmly. Bailey Rongs cried even more aggrieved. "My father used to love me, but it was hard for me to publicize it because I felt that I had never done anything for my father, so I felt ashamed of my father's love for me. But this time it's different. This time, I can stay with my father forever. I feel very happy just thinking about it, so I am a little bit arrogant to the courtiers during this period." As Bailey Rongs spoke, he knelt down in front of the emperor, hugged the emperor's legs and continued to cry, "I am really just happy, I never expected that it would cause such a disaster." End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 1025. Chapter 1025, Confusing Right and Wrong, Proving One's Innocence. Emperor Yongchang lowered his eyes slightly and looked at his son who was crying in front of him until he couldn't take care of himself. He would be lying if he said he didn't feel distressed. Different from other sons, this son was one whom he truly loved, and he naturally had deep feelings. In addition, the third prince always said it was his own fault without any complaints, which made Emperor Yongchang feel quite comfortable. Even if someone is against you, it is an indisputable fact that the Taoist temple was stolen. The person who stole it died in front of me because he took the elixir. How do you explain this? Emperor Yongchang is also confused now. He is a big man. Even if he doesn't understand medicine, he still knows that after taking the elixir for so long, his body is different from ordinary people. Just like this, Emperor Yongchang was obviously afraid of death, but he didn't even dare to teach it to an imperial doctor. Otherwise, if the imperial doctor really sees something, wouldn't everyone know that he, the emperor, is asking for elixirs and medicine? Those who have sought immortality throughout the ages have either been foolish kings or tyrants. How can he be confused with those people? Emperor Yongchang naturally didn't want to admit that he was exactly the same as those dimwit tyrants. He just decided that he wanted to live forever because he wanted to continue to benefit the people of Ziliang and let Bailey's foundation continue to be firmly rooted in Ziliang. On the cold land. "Father, if there is really something wrong with the elixir, my father's body should have reacted long ago. How could it be possible that my father is still fine until now? Besides, I have tried the elixir myself, and it will be given to my father only after it is truly insured," Yunyu said swornly. Emperor Yongchang looked at Yunyu, but had no intention of speaking. Obviously, the who died in front of him had already cast a shadow in his heart. Yunyu also knew that her words were empty and she quickly took out an elixir from her sleeve. This elixir was left behind by the thief after he stole the Taoist temple. "I am willing to use my own life to prove that I and the third prince are safe clean," Yunyu said as she swallowed the elixir into her belly. Emperor Yongchang was startled by Yunyu's actions, but he quickly regained his composure and fell into silence again when he looked at Yunyu and Bailey Rongs in front of him. Bailey Rongs and Yunyu looked at each other quietly, feeling very nervous. Obviously there is no bottom in my heart. It was not that their father had never been angry before, but no matter what the reason was, he would always explain it to them. But now, looking at their father's silent face, they couldn't guess what they were thinking. I don't know how long it took before I heard the emperor say, "I understand what you mean, go out." Yunyu was startled. Unexpectedly, she still didn't wait for her father's answer. She subconsciously wanted to continue explaining, but Bailey Rongs held her hand at the critical moment. "It is my father's unfilial piety that has disturbed my father's purity. When my father misses me and my son comes to visit my father again, please rest assured. As long as my father says a word, my son will definitely go through fire and water and die without hesitation." Li Rongs kowtowed heavily again, and then he and Yunyu both stood up and left. After leaving the courtyard, Yunyu shook off Bailey Rongs' hand and said, "What's the use of being humble in front of my father? The problem that needs to be solved is not yet solved." Bailey Rongs frowned and said, "Now that our father is suspicious of us, if we can no longer impress our father with sincerity and let him care about the compassion we had when we were young, then we will lose completely. If I had known this, I should have continued with the plan that day and let a little thief mess up the situation. Now we don't even have the refined elixir in our hands. How can we make father believe in us?" Yunyu somewhat complaining. It was a sudden incident at first, but it did not affect their people to continue rushing to the palace to the child. If Bailey Rongs had not blocked it secretly, I am afraid that the freshly baked elixirs would have been placed in front of their father. As long as my father feels the beauty brought by the elixir again, how can he still have the suspicion now? The current father is not the former father. He just believed us casually with a few words. Besides, I am still sending people to investigate this matter. I always feel that it cannot be such a coincidence at this time." Bailey Rongs' eyes were full of calculations. "Where is the timidity and panic that I just felt in front of the emperor?" "You are just too forward-thinking," Yunyu sighed, but did not continue. After all, no matter how the two of them argue now, they have to wait for their father's decision. In the palace, Emperor Yongchang suddenly asked, "Baitu, why haven't you seen the Heavenly Master recently?" Baitu quickly replied, replying to the emperor, "The Heavenly Master came to visit the emperor yesterday, but the emperor had already fallen asleep at that time. The Heavenly Master only left one sentence: 'Don't believe what you see, believe what you feel.' Do you believe your feelings?" Emperor Yongchang murmured, and subconsciously touched his chest, feeling the slowly beating heart. Emperor Yongchang's eyes finally settled. "Go and inform concubine Yu that the family dinner will be held in a few days. It will be held in her palace." Baitu lowered his head and hurriedly ran out to spread the message. It is normal to have small gatherings in the palace. Unless the emperor throws a grand banquet to celebrate a new year, the female family members and male guests will be confused together. Under normal circumstances, most of the banquets are held separately for men and women. But most of the banquets held by the female relatives will be managed by the queen. Now the emperor suddenly changed his mind and asked concubine Yu to host the banquet for the female family members. As soon as this news came out, it still caused a lot of turmoil in the palace. Even if the emperor made it clear in advance that he did not want the queen to work too hard, it was well known that the emperor preferred concubine Yu. Now, by coincidence, he bypassed the empress and let concubine Yu handle the banquet. It seemed that he was considerate of the empress. But where does this put the queen's face and majesty? Even Wu Qiuzhao had some taste after hearing this. "I have long heard that concubine Yu is deeply loved by the Holy Heart. I didn't expect that the emperor could really pamper her to such an extent. He didn't even care about the queen's feelings." "Perhaps the emperor is really worried about the queen's body," Fan Qinjiao said calmly. He was quite calm as there were no unexpected things. Since the emperor has decided to hold a banquet, no matter how hard the emperor goes, the outcome has been decided. Fan Qinjiao just didn't expect that the emperor could do so absolutely, leaving no escape route for anyone, not even himself. Is immortality really that delicious? Perhaps the more selfish a person is, the less they can see through it. Seeing that his sister-in-law's expression was wrong, Wu Qiuzhao quickly asked, Sister-in-law, what are you feeling uncomfortable about? I know you are worried about the queen, but you must also take care of your own body. Fan Kinjao naturally didn't want his sister-in-law to ask any more questions, so he smiled and said, "Did concubine Lu Shu send someone here today?" Wu Qiuzhao shook his head, "No." Fan Kinjao was stunned. This was something she didn't expect. Calculating that Cao Lishan had been taken away for a long time, concubine Lu Shu had no reason to follow the queen wholeheartedly. Logically speaking, even if she deliberately delayed it, the emperor's banquet was a once-in-a-lifetime reason to send her back. Concubine Lu Shu naturally wanted to follow the trend of. But concubine Lu Shu didn't. This is a little strange. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 1026. Chapter 1026 The Second Banquet. If my sister-in-law feels that something is wrong, why don't we ask for him back first, Wu Qiuzhao suggested. Since concubine Lu Shu likes to keep it buttoned, then let's keep buttoning it, Fan Kinjao said calmly. It's actually not difficult to guess what concubine Lu Shu is planning. She hasn't sent the person back at this time, just because she wants to see her attitude towards Cao Lishan, so that she can use Cao Lishan to gain personal favors from her. In this matter, whether Lu Shifei was forced or willing to take Cao Lishan away, she did her a favor, and she had to pay it back due to circumstances and reasons. But if she wanted to take the opportunity to blackmail, she naturally could not give Lu Shifei this opportunity. Besides, she really doesn't have the energy to deal with Cao Lishan now. The day for the emperor's banquet came soon. Since men and women had separate banquets, while the men had already rushed to the main hall where the banquet was held, the prince and concubine had to abide by the rules and run to see her first. Mother-in-law, you can only go to the banquet with your mother-in-law after listening to her instructions. Yan Hanbei's heart was really struggling when he thought of going to see Lu Renfei, but what if she disagreed? Could she really not go? Naturally it is impossible. King Pinglai saw Yan Hanbei's resistance, took her hand and said, "Although my concubine likes to scold people, she is not a bad person. Besides, my concubine only has a son like me. If even you and I are, how can she be sad if she is rejected?" Yan Hanbei didn't want to embarrass King Pinglai, so he nodded and said, "I am also a mother, so naturally I can understand and sympathize with concubine Lu Shu's mood." King Pinglai smiled and held his wife's hand tighter. "Yan Hanbei, are you ashamed that an old married couple is still so tired?" Concubine Jiangshu had been waiting in the palace early. When she saw her son and his daughter-in-law coming in, she took the initiative to greet her with a smile on her face. Looking at the little princess in Yan Hanbei's arms, she smiled lovingly. This child is really obedient. He understands that his parents have to walk, and he actually sleeps so sincerely. But it's not like when the prince was a child, he didn't have a moment to rest, Zhang Shifei said, and held the child in her arms. King Pinglai smiled and said, "What the mother and concubine said is that it was the son who worried the mother and concubine in the past." "What are you talking about? I am your mother-in-law. How can I harm you? Go and sit over there. I have asked someone to prepare hot tea for you and the princess. You go first to drive away the cold. Let's go together again." "Let's go to the banquet," Zhang Shifei said with a smile. Her enthusiasm was almost overwhelming. Yan Hanbei didn't expect that concubine Jiangshu would treat her so kindly. She was a little stunned for a moment, and she obviously couldn't accept it. After all, she had never dealt with this mother-in-law before, and she was not a friendly person. "Let's go, we can't ignore the concubine's wishes." King Pinglai took Yan Hanbei's hand and said. Yan Hanbei came back to his senses and pushed the wooden cart to the soft cave. Because King Pinglai had no feeling in his legs, he could only lift him up by Yan Hanbei. Concubine Jiangshu saw this and was worried about Yan Hanbei. Injured and tired, he quickly called the palace servants to help. Such a mother-in-law, even King Pinglai was a little unexpected. Thinking about the painful experience of his mother and concubine scolding him a few days ago, King Pinglai thought that he had a nightmare, but now looking at his mother and concubine's appearance, he thought that he had completely thought about it. King Pinglai was completely relieved, and then he took his wife and started chatting together. In the bedroom, it seems to be harmonious and happy. The atmosphere is so harmonious that even the temperature in the room is rising. It was King Pinglai who was having a lively chat with his wife. He didn't notice at all that concubine Jiangshu had a smile on her lips, but her eyes were staring at them as cold as knives. In the end, the gaze fell on Yan Hanbei. At the same time, the eighth prince and concubine had already sat down with concubine Jiangshu. Since the eighth prince left, the relationship between the eighth prince and concubine Jiangshu was harmonious to the naked eye. Now that the eighth prince and concubine told Zhang Shifei that the eighth prince was expected to come back this year, Zhang Shifei was so happy that she could not open her mouth from ear to ear. As for the sixth prince, since he did not have a mother-in-law, he took Han Jingchen and went directly to see the queen. Anyway, every child in the palace was required to address the queen as mother. Now he went to see the queen. There is nothing wrong with that. Fan Qinjiao heard that the sixth prince and the sixth princess had arrived at the queen's palace, so he packed up and walked out. Before leaving, he deliberately took Rengeer and Kingzin with him. Rengeer has always been obedient and sensible. He let his little ant hold his little hand and walked quietly along the way. He even worried about his little ant's speed from time to time. But looking at Kingzin again, she didn't stop so much. She kept moving around in Fan Qinjiao's arms like a little pug. Fan Qinjiao had to stop several times and move the things in his arms again. The little thing was hugged. Giggle. Kingzin seemed to have taken a fancy to the red hairpin on Fan Qinjiao's bun. She smiled and stretched out her chubby hand to pull it down. It's just a hairpin, Fan Qinjiao still doesn't care, but if the hairpin falls off and the bun is unraveled, it's a big deal. Concubine Yu is taking care of it today, so there's no need to delay it. Fan Qinjiao was just thinking about how to stop Kingzin's fat little hands, when a pair of slender beautiful hands stretched out and took Kingzin away from her arms. Kingzin was originally very unhappy to be carried away, but her pouty mouth didn't last for 3 seconds. When she saw the person holding her, she suddenly smiled like a flower. Happier than before. Fan Qinjiao. This nymphomaniac problem should always be cured. I have met His Highness the Crown Prince, Rengeer said with his neatly packed luggage. Why did you come here free? Fan Qinjiao looked at the snow-white man who was holding his heart in his arms, and said he was not happy. After all, she and he hadn't seen each other for a while. Bailey Fengming held Kingzin in one hand and Rengeer in the other and said, "Let's go, I'll take you to the Queen Mother's place." Fan Qinjiao didn't think too much. He followed Bailey Fengming out of the courtyard. Thinking about what he was pretending to be, he whispered, "Since the emperor has decided to hold a banquet, this matter can no longer be changed. This is our only choice, it's also the last chance." Bailey Fengming hugged Kingzin in his arms a little tighter, and then said, "My father went to such great lengths and even asked concubine Yu to come forward to organize the banquet for the female family members. It is very clear why." Fan Qinjiao naturally knew this. By hosting a banquet, the emperor obviously chose to trust Bailey Rongs again. As for Bailey Rongs, if he wanted to capture the emperor's heart again, he must continue to refine the elixir. So today's banquet was basically planned for Bailey Rongs to capture the child. The emperor is personally watching over the men, and concubine Yu is watching over the women's side. In this way, both sides are being watched to death, and Bailey Wrong's side is naturally easy to take action. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 1027. Chapter 1027, You will have what others have. Since we have been prepared, if we obstruct him midway, we may arouse the emperor's suspicion. Fan Kinjao frowned. Now that the fourth uncle has gone back, that means that there is no one outside who can coordinate with them, and it is impossible for Bailey Fengming to really ask Qinkai School to come forward for this matter. If the incident comes to light, everything Bailey Fengming has done over the years will be in vain. Don't worry, I've already made arrangements, Bailey Fengming said with a smile. Fan Kinjao knew that Bailey Fengming would not deceive her, but she really couldn't figure out who Bailey Fengming had entrusted this matter to. Compared to the previous days, there were obviously a lot more people in the palace today. The number of people who came to check on the luggage of 2 people along the way could not be counted on one hand. Fan Kinjao didn't think it was anything at first, but as the whispers around him became louder and louder, it was difficult for Fan Kinjao not to pay attention. It is now time for the princes to accompany the princess to meet their mother-in-law. It stands to reason that she and the queen are so familiar, so there is no need for Bailey Fengming to accompany her, but Bailey Fengming came anyway. Even though he didn't say anything, Fan Kinjao couldn't guess that this was clearly telling her that he could also give her what others had. This kind of carefulness is really. Fan Kinjao couldn't express anything in front of outsiders, so he could only follow Bailey Fengming and continue walking towards the queen. But on the way, we met many ladies from the official families. Looking at this scene, who didn't have red eyes with envy? Forget about the other princes and concubines. After all, they are all married to the royal family. The princes are required to accompany them regardless of their wishes or not according to the rules. But the prince concubine has not yet been married. To put it bluntly, then the royal gate is only halfway through. But the prince is able to be such a companion, who wouldn't say it's so sad to see him? The prince's reputation has always been not as good as that of the third prince, so everyone's eyes naturally turned towards the third prince. But now that they looked at the prince more and more favorably. They are handsome and love the people around them. As for whether they are loved by the emperor or not, what does it have to do with them? It was a coincidence that Bailey Wrongs was accompanying Guan Panner to his mother's palace at this moment. Originally, there were many female relatives looking towards him on the road. He also enjoyed being noticed by women. This feeling, but as I walked, those eyes just disappeared. Bailey Wrongs didn't understand what was going on at first, but he couldn't help but the whispers around him floated here and there. Bailey Wrongs could understand what was going on, no matter how deaf he was. Bell Wrongs. Is this even possible? Having always been able to outdo the prince since he was a child, he never thought that one day he would lose to the prince so obviously, and it would still be on his face. That's outrageous. Fan Kinjao didn't know that Bailey Wrong's expression was about to vomit blood. When Bailey Fengming arrived at the queen's chamber, He was already waiting at the door. Seeing someone coming, Lily hurriedly invited him inside with a smile. The queen is waiting for the crown prince and crown princess in the side hall. The side hall is smaller than the main hall, but it has a bed. Obviously, the empress wanted the children to roll on the bed so that Fan Kinjao could relax for a while. Fan Kinjao didn't expect the queen's arrangements to be so thoughtful, and said with a smile, "Let the queen worry about it." Lily smiled and led the way. The crown princess and the queen are one family, so it is natural for the queen to feel sorry for the crown princess. While talking all the way, we came to the side hall. As expected, everything inside had been carefully decorated, and even the ground was covered with thick blankets. In this way, even if these little things let themselves go completely, they will not be afraid of being bumped. Yuanyu was already sitting on the ground, and Yunjin from the 6th prince's family was also there. Seeing King Xin and brother Ren coming, Yuan Yunjin hurriedly greeted Fan Qinjiao and Bailey Fengming, taking brother Ren with them. And King Xin went to the side to play with gadgets. Han Jingchen quickly stood up and walked to Fan Qinjiao's side, pulling him towards the chair. When you come, someone will talk to me, Fan Qinjiao teased. When did the sixth prince sew his mouth shut, woke up? Han Jingchen said helplessly, what's the point of talking to one person all day long? It's not like you and His Highness the Crown Prince haven't gotten married yet, and it's the time when we miss each other. But with His Highness the Crown Prince's face, I think it will be you who get married in the future. I won't get tired of it. Even if you are tired of it, don't you still have a face to hold on to? People who have good-looking parents get this kind of special treatment. The sixth prince, whose mouth is sewn up and is boring. Why is he standing here today? Turning to look at the prince next to him, the sixth prince's eyes became a little resentful. My father is hosting a banquet today, and the prince should have gone to help with it earlier. The prince and concubine are already so familiar with their mother, and the prince also, why bother with this trip? If you hadn't insisted on tossing it, how could I have been despised like this? Bailey Fengming didn't seem to notice the sixth prince's complaint, and said with a smile, I heard that the sixth prince came to visit my mother, so I naturally wanted to come over to join in the fun, and I will go to the main hall with the sixth prince later. I have someone to talk to on the way. The sixth prince did not expect that the reason why the prince came had something to do with him. He was a little frightened at first. He felt uncomfortable when he entered the palace alone and was looked at by those eyes, but now he didn't have to worry at all. In an instant, the sixth prince was elated. Han Jingchen. It was unexpected and reasonable to switch sides in this way. Queen Zhen 11 heard the movement in the side hall and walked over with Lily's support. Bailey Fengming and the sixth prince first paid their respects to the queen and then left early. You two should sit down too. Queen Zhen 11 looked at Fan Qinjiao and Han Jingchen and said. Normally, Fan Qinjiao usually sits on the bench next to the queen, but now that there is another Han Jingchen, it is always difficult for her to sit on the bench alone, so Fan Qinjiao sits with her. On the chair. Empress Zhen 11 looked at Fan Qinjiao's actions, and a flash of appreciation flashed in her eyes. The world only thought that this child's sweet words had attracted so many people to her side, but they didn't know that she actually treated everyone sincerely. No wonder people flock to it. The most rare thing in this world is a sincere heart. Lily knew that the queen must have something to say to the crown princess, so she thoughtfully brought all the little ones to the bed. Anyway, the bed in the side hall was big enough for them to toss on it. As for the other palace servants, Lily sent them all out, and she stayed with her young masters wholeheartedly. Once the people in the side hall had left, Queen Zhen 11 looked at the two of them and said, going to concubine Yu's place for a banquet today is no better than being here in this palace, so I still need to keep my spirits up. Han Jingchen squeezed the handkerchief tightly and said, don't worry, mother, my daughter-in-law will always keep an eye on the emperor's grandson. Queen Zhen 11 said, children like to move around, how can you keep an eye on them? It's you adults who should stay awake at all times. Han Jingchen was stunned. The queen didn't let her care too much about the child. Why is that? Isn't it obvious that today's banquet is for the children? End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 1028. Chapter 1028 Yuanyu is injured. Fan Qinjiao didn't react when she first heard the empress said this, but soon she understood. What does the empress mean? Concubine Yu actually doesn't want anything bad to happen to the children than we do. Queen Zhen 11 nodded and said, this is natural. Today we are hosting a banquet on concubine Yu's property. No matter what damage the children have, how can concubine Yu escape the consequences? Han Jingchen. When she said this, she didn't understand even more. Fan Qinjiao also frowned, obviously confused. If that's the case, Why does the emperor insist on holding a banquet at concubine Yu's place? Doesn't the emperor want to? Your Majesty, you always spend a lot of time thinking about something before doing something. Once you decide on something, you won't look back easily. Empress Zhen 11's words were just nice to say, and you can tell if you listen carefully, they are completely implying that the emperor is suspicious, selfish, and addicted, and will not hesitate to use all means for his own benefit. The word beast was scolded directly. Of course Fan Qinjiao also understood the emperor's nature, and it was precisely because of this that he was completely entangled. If the emperor really wanted to prompt Bailey Rongs to kidnap the child to make elixirs, no matter where the banquet was held, it should not be held at concubine Yu. Just now she only thought that concubine Yu would keep an eye on them, but she forgot that if something happened to the child, concubine Yu would not be able to escape the blame. But the emperor hosted a banquet at concubine Yu's side. What do you want to do? The emperor has no intention of giving up alchemy, and he has also given up his children to concubine Yu. What does this mean? It was about to go to the banquet, but all the ideas were overturned. This feeling was really uncomfortable, and Fan Qinjiao's brows did not relax. Today's things are indeed strange. Even I haven't figured out the reason yet, so I asked you to cheer up. Today's banquet is a tough battle, Empress Zhen 11 warned. My daughter-in-law understands. Fan Qinjiao nodded and tried his best to calm down. Since he couldn't think of a clue, he might as well just let it go and take a look. It is better to have a bright future than to be stuck in the dark. At least there is a way to survive. Oh. Suddenly, there were bursts of crying and howling sounds coming from the other side of the bed. Queen Zhen 11 quickly stood up and walked over, followed by Fan Qinjiao and Han Jingchen. When they reached the bed, they saw that the back of Yuan Yu's hand was red and swollen, and the little person was crying heartbrokenly. Fan Qinjiao quickly picked up Yuan Yu and told the palace attendants outside, "Get a basin of cold water. The cooler the better." "What's going on?" Queen Zhengzi asked, looking at Lily and the palace maid kneeling on the ground. Seeing the queen's arrival, Lily also knelt on the ground. It was all due to the slave's negligence that Princess Yuan Yu knocked over the tea tray and burned her hand. The little palace maid who was kneeling on the ground trembled when she heard this and lowered her head. Han Jingchen looked at the palace maid, a trace of suspicion flashed in her eyes. They were sitting outside and did not hear Lily summoning people to come in and serve tea. It was obviously the palace lady who made her own decision, so why should Lily help her with the matter now? Queen Zhen 11's reaction was naturally faster than that of Yan Hanbei. She looked at the little palace maid and said, "You innocently put the teacup where the little masters can get it. Do you know your guilt?" The little palace maid trembled, kowtowed quickly and said, "I know your sin. Come here, drag this clumsy slave out and torture him in the courtyard." Queen Zhengzi had a cold face, and her aura alone made people dare not look at her. Of course Empress Zhengzi knew Lily's intentions. The palace was no better than being in the palace. Most of the palace residents had no masters to control them all year round and were very wild. Instead of imposing severe punishments on certain things, it is better to impose small favors. This can be regarded as taking the opportunity to develop new confidants, and it can also show those who have become confidants how kind she is. But when it comes to January, Queen Zhengzi must not be careless. If she is not severely punished today, these slaves may do some careless things in the future. Seeing that the queen had made a decision, Lily lowered her head and said nothing more. She waited until the little palace maid was dragged into the courtyard and beaten up, then she stood up and silently walked to the queen's side. After all this trouble, it was almost time to go to concubine Yu's place for a banquet. Fortunately, Yuan Yu's injury was not serious. After Fan Qinjiao simply applied ice, the swelling had obviously subsided, but the pain was still there. "How about your daughter-in-law go back first and get the medicine box?" Fan Qinjiao suggested. "It's better to be late for the banquet today," otherwise concubine you may be trying to catch some excuses. Empress Gen 11 frowned, and then told Lily, you stay with Yuanyu for the time being. After the imperial doctor diagnoses and treats her, everything is fine, and then I will take Yuanyu to the banquet. Lily nodded and said, I understand. Empress Gen 11 asked the palace staff to send the imperial doctor again. After everything was done, she took Fan Qinjiao and Han Jingchen out of the courtyard. The palace where concubine Yu lives is much higher than where the empress lives. Fan Qinjiao followed the empress for about 2/4 of an hour before arriving. At this time, the courtyard was already filled with many people, all of whom were the maids who came with the concubines and princes, because Fan Qinjiao did not bring anyone close to him this time, and in addition, Lily was beside the empress. They are taking care of Yuanyu again, but now in this scene, they seem to be alone. The slaves come to see the queen, the crown prince, and the sixth prince's concubine. Accompanied by the greetings from the palace people in the courtyard, Fan Qinjiao followed the queen towards the house, but just before entering the door, a crisp banging sound suddenly exploded. There's a rush. It turns out that the little palace maid was nervous or something, and she broke the teacup in her hand. This slave deserves to die for his crime deserves to die for 10,000 things. The little palace maid knelt on the ground and kowtowed repeatedly. It was naturally impossible for Queen Gen 11 to deal with people in concubine Yu's territory. She didn't even bother to pay attention to the maid, and continued walking inside with Fan Qinjiao and Han Jingchen. The little palace maid saw that the queen had no intention of blaming herself, so she quickly got up and ran away secretly. Fan Qinjiao frowned as he watched this scene. Whether concubine Yu deliberately wanted to scare the queen, or the little palace maid was really unintentional, if she made a mistake, someone would always come forward to reprimand and punish her. Otherwise, wouldn't it seem that concubine Yu doesn't know how to train her servants? Unfortunately, no one came forward from the time the teacup was broken to the time when the maid left. This is strange. What's wrong? Han Jingchen asked softly. It's okay. Fan Qinjiao shook his head and continued to follow the empress. I hope she is overthinking it. As a few people entered the door, the originally lively atmosphere suddenly fell silent, and everyone stood up to salute and say goodbye. Empress Gen 11 waved her hands and said, the emperor said that today is a family banquet. All sisters and princesses, please get up. There is no need to be so formal. Concubine Yu stood up with the support of Grandma Ying. She looked at the queen and said, the queen is really busy. She even came late to the family banquet. But it's not too late to come here. We are here. I just talked about the queen, and the queen is here. Fan Qinjiao frowned. Concubine Yu really did not miss any opportunity to find fault. These words were clearly talking about the late arrival of the queen, which broke the originally harmonious atmosphere in the room. Such words may seem harmless, but they are extremely offensive. I remember that in the last life, when Fan Qinjiao was the daughter-in-law of concubine Yu, she was often ridiculed in a roundabout way by concubine Yu. At that time, Fan Qinjiao naively complained to Bailey Wrongs, but in the end he was scolded by Bailey Wrongs. Fan. Later on, Fan Qinjiao learned to be patient, and concubine Yu also became more and more aggressive. Princess Yuanyu accidentally burned her hand with the hot tea, so she came a little late. I hope my sister and the princesses don't mind, Empress Gen 11 said calmly, without any trace of anger on her face. Once such words came out, not to mention the concubines present, even the princes and concubines did not dare to say a word. Just kidding, who dares to complain in front of the queen? Don't you want to live anymore? Empress Gen 11 paused and said, this palace is not as good as staying in the imperial palace. Like all of you, I am here temporarily. When I return to the main city, I will definitely send someone to send small gifts to the princes and concubines. It can be regarded as my own. The palace's thoughts. No matter what the queen has given, it represents the honor bestowed by the queen, and all the princes and concubines present want it. As the saying goes, you have short hands. Since I have taken the queen's things, I naturally don't dare to complain anymore. This method is really not enough even if you don't accept it. Princess Yuanyu's injury is not a trivial matter, and it is reasonable for the mother to delay. My daughter-in-law has long heard that the Queen Mother takes great care of Princess Yuanyu. Now that Princess Yuanyu is injured, the Queen Mother must be very heartbroken, but she still comes to eat and drink with us. It is our fault. The great love in my mother's heart is something we can never match. Just in an instant, all the winds turned to the Queen's side. Concubine Yu was really angry when she saw it. She had a cold face, not to mention how ugly it was. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 1029. Chapter 1029 is basically here to subjugate demons. At the critical moment, Yunyu came over with a smile and said, "It would be great if the queen came. I was just talking to the third prince about missing the princess, but I didn't expect that the queen would send her here." Fan Kinjao. Will the third princess and Yunyu miss her? She would be beaten to death for not believing this. It was obvious that Yunyu wanted to find an excuse to help concubine Yu smooth things over. Empress Zhen 11 smiled and said, "Princess Yunyu has been very smart since she was a child, and now she speaks and acts with a sense of cleverness. It's really hard for me not to like her." The smile on Yunyu's face froze, as if she didn't hear the queen's sarcasm. She hugged the queen's arm and said, "I know that the queen understands her children best. When it comes to pretending to be confused while pretending to understand, there is no one better than this man." Queen Zhen 11 smiled more sincerely than Yunyu. Our Yunyu still has a sweet mouth. Yunyu and Empress Zhen 11 go back and forth, singing about the deep love between mother and daughter. Who is the one who responds? Of course it's concubine Yu. Even though concubine Yu knew Yunyu's purpose like a mirror in her heart, she still felt uncomfortable just seeing the flesh falling off her body being kissed by the queen as if she were her own child. But concubine Yu naturally couldn't show anything. She just looked at Yunyu and said, "Okay, don't make trouble with the queen. You can take the crown princess to sit over there." What the mother said is that I will take the princess to the side to chat. Yunyu thanked concubine Yu and came to invite Fan Kinjao. By the way, she also took Han Jingchen to a chair nearby. As soon as Yan Hanbei and the 8th princess saw the crown princess coming, they basically didn't even need to make eye contact, they just took the initiative to sit together. Adding Han Jingchen, it was a lively affair. Guan Pan'er was naturally jealous of Fan Kinjao's good popularity, but she couldn't lose face if she wanted her to take the initiative, so for a while she became the one who was left out. This kind of treatment has never been encountered by Guan Pan'er since she was a child, so she naturally felt uncomfortable. Yunyu took the initiative to come over and said, "The third prince's concubine has the same status as the crown prince's, and they are both the royal sisters-in-law. It is better to be in harmony." Guan Pan'er said aggrievedly, "Princess Yunyu also saw it, and they ignored me at all. Why should I put my hot face on their cold buttocks?" This is what Yunyu was waiting for. If Fan Kinjao can really be labeled as aloof, arrogant, and isolated sister-in-law, it will naturally damage Fan Kinjao's reputation. But before Yunyu could speak, Fan Kinjao took the initiative to look over here and said, "How come the third prince and concubine have to sit so far away? There is still room here. Come and sit with us." Guan Pan'er. Yunyu. Have Fan Kinjao's ears been consecrated? Otherwise, why would you be so sharp? Guan Pan'er's chin raised in an instant. So what if Fan Kinjao was the prince's concubine? After all, he still had to take the initiative to invite her over? Just when Guan Painter actually sat over, things changed. What Yan Hanbei and others experienced with Fan Qinjiao, Guan Painter can't say he can relate to it, but he has never even heard of it. In addition, Guan Painter and a few people basically don't move around on weekdays, and they don't even want to interrupt. They can't be plugged in. Guan Painter, who was showing off his power just now. Now I just want to cry. Fan Qinjiao did it on purpose, just to ridicule her in a different way. Fan Qinjiao naturally did it on purpose. But this kind of intentionality cannot be grasped by anyone. I invited you anyway, and you took the initiative to come. Everyone else can talk about everything, but you can't even pronounce a word. It's not your problem, but whose problem is it? Guan Painter. One of them couldn't hold it back and actually cried out of anger. I really cried, and the tears fell one drop at a time. Concubine Panda felt uncomfortable seeing her niece being wronged, but she did not dare to question Fan Qinjiao directly in front of the queen, so she could only look at Concubine Yu secretly. Concubine Yu noticed Concubine Panda's gaze and frowned. She raised her niece like a waist and she only wanted to blame others. Where is your face? What's wrong with the third princess? Come and sit here with me. Concubine Yu took the initiative to say so. However, Concubine Yu naturally still wanted to help Concubine Panda, and she herself didn't want Fan Qinjiao to have an easy time. At this time, Guan Painter was crying. She stood up and really wanted to go to Concubine Yu. Seeing this, Yun Yu quickly walked over, pressed Guan Painter's shoulder and said, "How could the third prince's concubine be like this? There are no rules, and it's actually not a big deal if it interrupts the conversation between the concubine and the empress. It's just that I didn't talk to the princess and the others much, so that's why I'm crying." Concubine Yu smiled and said, "This is the third prince's fault. Everyone inside and outside the palace doesn't know that the prince's temperament is impeccable and her popularity is the best. Pan Dfi. Are you sure this is helping her niece?" Concubine Yu didn't care about Concubine Panda's expression, looked at Fan Qinjiao and said, "I heard that the crown princess pities her juniors very much and treats them as if they were her own children." Those who didn't know thought they were the crown princess's son and daughter. At this point, Concubine Yu suddenly covered her red lips with a veil and smiled softly, "Look at my memory. The crown princess has not married the crown prince yet, so how can she possibly have a child of her own?" As soon as these words came out, the room suddenly became quiet. Everyone knows that Concubine Yu doesn't like the crown princess. This is human nature. Who makes the crown princess the queen's biological daughter-in-law? But they didn't expect Concubine Yu to be so ruthless. It's just an insult and a heart-wrenching thing. Either the crown princess admits that she intends to use the child to make a fuss about the marriage. If she doesn't admit it, she can only let the rumors spread. By then, I'm afraid it will be reported that the crown princess is pregnant before marriage. No matter how you answer this, it seems to be fatal. Fan Qinjiao is relatively calm. Anyway, she had long known that Concubine Yu looked down on her, so there was nothing to feel sad about now. Slightly raising his eyes to look at Concubine Yu's eyes that seemed to hide a knife, Fan Qinjiao smiled and said, "If you think about it, I'm just copying the gourd. After all, everyone knows that Concubine Yu has always taken care of Concubine Panda's family. She is a niece first, and then a niece. Concubine Yu can take care of even people who are not related by blood with such great care. I just pity my biological sister and biological nephew, so there is no way I can take credit for it. In fact, both Pan Yulu and Guan Paner are the daughters-in-law of Concubine Yu, and Concubine Yu should help them in any way they can." But it happened that Fan Qinjiao deliberately avoided the important and ignored the light. He only talked about the relationship between Pan Yulu, Guan Paner and Pan Dfi, and never mentioned the fact that they were both the third prince's concubine. At this time, Concubine Yu's intentions were clearly revealed to the public. The two princesses I found for my son were both related to concubine Panda. What else could they do if they didn't have selfish motives? If the room was just quiet just now, then it is deathly quiet now. Who would have thought that someone would dare to confront the imperial concubine in person? But the crown princess dared to do so. Not only did he fight back, he also fought openly and honestly. Several concubines present were dumbfounded just by looking at it. They had known from early on that the crown princess was brave and resourceful, but they never expected that the crown princess would be so courageous. Where did the crown princess come to attend the banquet? The crown princess is here to slay demons, right? End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 1030. Chapter 1030, Planned Murder. Speaking of the concubines in the harem choosing a daughter-in-law for their son, who would not choose a candidate who is powerful for them? In fact, this is nothing, it is just a secret that everyone knows well. But now that Fan Kinjao told it so clearly, concubine Yu naturally couldn't sit still. She raised her hand and pointed at Fan Kinjao and yelled angrily, being so arrogant and domineering even before entering the royal gate, "How brave you are! Since Fan Kinjao dares to speak, he has nothing to fear." But before she could speak, Queen Zhen 11, who was sitting on the main seat, put down the teacup in her hand and said calmly, "When we choose our daughter-in-law, naturally we all choose them carefully. We can't always choose her. Why should concubine you be so angry after ruining the lives of the younger generation? Everyone does this, but you are the only one who doesn't let anyone tell you if you do it." Concubine Yu's face was naturally ugly, but she couldn't think of anything to say in reply to the queen, so she could only sneer, but she didn't say anything else. Yunyu said with a smile, "What the queen mother said is just trivial things. There is no need for us to get angry over this. And Fan, please go out for a walk with the crown princess and the third prince's concubine. It's time to leave relaxed." Yunyu's meaning is obvious, she hopes Fan Swinning will come forward to let Fan Kinjao make peace with Guan Pan'er. Looking at this normally, there is indeed no problem. Fan Swinning is Fan Kinjao's sister, so it's most appropriate for her to be the peacemaker in this matter. But the problem is, who doesn't know that the crown princess and Aunt Fan have been at odds since childhood? At this time, Yunyu unexpectedly asked Fan Swinning to come forward to find out whether she wanted to make peace or to resist Fan Kinjao. It's just that Yunyu is a princess after all, and what Yunyu showed was that she really hoped that Fan Kinjao and Guan Pan'er could resolve their past feud, which made no one present say anything. Otherwise, wouldn't it be suspected of deliberately deepening the gap between the crown prince and the third prince's concubine? Fan Swinning was obedient and had already walked to Fan Kinjao's side. "I'll take my sister out for a walk." Han Jingchen and others all looked at Fan Kinjao. The look was so obvious that they almost said, "As long as you don't agree, we will fight Yunyu at all costs." Of course, Fan Kinjao couldn't let Han Jingchen and others make any excuses for him, so he sent Brother Ren and Kings in to the queen's side with a smile, and then said with a smile, "Then I'll bother Aunt Fan. One is Fan Swinning and the other is Guan Pan'er." The discord is indeed obvious. But when it comes to fear, Fan Kinjao has never been afraid. Seeing Fan Kinjao stand up, Guan Pan'er followed him even though he was reluctant, and several people followed the back door and walked around into the back garden of Concubine Yu's palace. "The autumn sunshine is warm and feels very comfortable on my body." Fan Swinning led the way and took the two of them into a pavilion. It was a beautiful scenery surrounded by mountains and rivers. Fan Swinning first ordered the palace attendants to get tea and snacks, then sat down and said, "Speaking of which, my sister and I haven't calmed down to talk for a long time." Fan Kinjao said calmly, "Aunt Fan and I are different people after all, and we have nothing in common." Guan Pan'er frowned after hearing this. "There is no one else here, Fan Kinjao, why do you continue to pretend? Who in the main city doesn't know what happened to you when you were a child? You are just a person who was kicked out of the house. He's just a bastard, who are you showing off to now? Fan Kinjao was not annoyed. He looked at Guan Panner and said, what happened when I was a child is a thing of the past. As long as I am the crown princess now, it is enough. Guan Panner. This one also has selective amnesia? Since the third prince and concubine remembers my childhood so clearly, she should know more clearly who I am now. I respect the third prince and concubine as my sisters-in-law, and I have always been polite and conciliatory in my words. I hope that the third prince and concubine can also understand each other. The principle of respect, Fan Kinjao reminded. Guan Panner's face darkened. What do you mean? Fan Kinjao smiled lightly and said, literally. You. Why, does the Guan family raise their children without even reading books? Guan Panner was so angry that he couldn't even utter a single word after trembling for a long time. Fan Swinning said with a smile, Third princess, please be patient. My sister has always been a straight-tempered person. She will say whatever she wants. At this moment, Guan Panner really felt sympathy for Fan Swinning. It was a miracle that she could survive with such a support sister on her head. It's so suffocating. Several people were talking when they saw a palace maid walking over carrying tea and snacks. Fan Kinjao looked around idly and saw a slightly familiar face among the maids. When he thought about it carefully, it was the person who had just broken the teacup. The palace maid seemed to have noticed Fan Kinjao's gaze and lowered her head. Fan Kinjao looked at the palace maid's behavior, obviously feeling guilty and nervous. Was he afraid that she would mention the incident of knocking over the teacup just now? But everyone saw it at that time. If the person in charge wanted to punish him, he would have punished him long ago. How could he still be served by others? Just as Fan Kinjao was thinking about it, the maids entered the pavilion and placed the pastries and teacups in their hands on the stone table one by one. When they waited for the maid, she actually bent down and placed the pastries on the table. But a pair of feet were obviously rubbing in Guan Panner's direction. At the same time, a cold light suddenly appeared. Everything happened very quickly. Before anyone could realize what was going on, they saw that the palace maid had already stabbed Guan Panner in the chest with the dagger hidden in her sleeve. Guan Panner looked straight at the sharp light that was dazzling in the sun, and even forgot to move. Completely frightened, Fan Kinjao stood up suddenly and subconsciously pulled Guan Panner to his side. The palace maid stabbed in the air and rushed towards Fan Kinjao. Fan Kinjao realized that the palace maid was not showing strength. He simply raised his foot and kicked the palace maid in the abdomen. The palace maid seemed not to have expected Fan Kinjao to fight back. She took the kick without any precaution and her body leaned back. It was impossible for Fan Kinjao to take out the silver needle from his sleeve in front of Fan Swinning and Guan Panner. When the palace maid didn't react, he quickly kicked her again, but he missed the opportunity. At the critical moment, Guan Panner grabbed Fan Kinjao's hand and said, I'll grab you and keep kicking. Fan Kinjao had no time to talk to Guan Panner at this time. With Guan Panner's help, he stretched out his foot and kicked the palace maid again. Fortunately, he finally managed to kick someone. I saw the palace maid instantly falling out of the pavilion and smashing straight towards the calm lake. Plop, there was a sound and water splashed everywhere. Immediately afterwards, I saw a group of people walking over in a hurry. The leader was the queen, followed by concubine Yu, and then the other concubines, Han Jingchen and others. Fan Kinjao looked at the person coming and subconsciously looked for Fan Swinning. He saw Fan Swinning slumped on the ground. It was obvious that he was not the person she was looking for. So how did the queen and the others arrive in such time? What happened? Queen Zhen 11 asked. Fan Swinning quickly said, Hui, back to the queen, there was someone who wanted to assassinate me. Fortunately, the crown princess took action in time, and I was able to resolve it. Fan Swinning was still trembling as she spoke, obviously frightened. Queen Zhen 11 looked at Fan Qingjao and asked, "Where is the assassin?" Fan Qingjao said truthfully, "It's in the lake." This time, before the Empress could speak again, Concubine Yu calmly ordered Ant Ying beside her, "You dare to assassinate me right under my nose. How brave you are! Arrest him and interrogate him strictly." Grandma Ying received the order and quickly led her people to the lake to fish for people. "It hurts, it hurts." Just when everyone breathed a sigh of relief, Guan Pan'er, who had been blocked behind by Fan Qingjao, suddenly fell to the ground with his hands on his stomach. Before he could finish speaking, he passed out first. Concubine Yu was so frightened that she couldn't even care about any etiquette. She rushed over and hugged Guan Pan'er and shouted, "The Imperial Doctor! Send the Imperial Doctor to you quickly." End of this chapter.